Apache widow was stealing. "My kids are hungry," she begged when the childless rancher caught her. The desert town stood far away from busy highways, hidden behind long stretches of dusty road and low brown hills. Travelers rarely stopped there unless they had family or work waiting. The wind carried sand across wooden porches, and most days felt the same, quiet, slow, and predictable. Everyone knew everyone, and news traveled faster than the mail truck. At the far edge of the settlement lived a rancher in a wide, aging house surrounded by fencing and open land. His property stretched farther than most people could walk in an hour. A few cattle moved lazily across the fields, and a small chicken coop sat near the barn. He kept everything neat and orderly. Tools were always hung in the same place. Gates were closed exactly the same way each night. Even his boots were cleaned before he stepped inside. People respected him but did not know him well. Years earlier, he had been more talkative. He used to visit the local store for coffee and sit outside with the other men who discussed weather and prices. But after his wife passed away from illness, something in him changed. He stopped staying long in town. He spoke only when necessary. If someone asked how he was doing, he answered with a short nod and nothing more. No one blamed him. Grief was understood in small communities, but time kept moving and people slowly stopped trying to pull him back into conversations. Eventually, they learned to wave from a distance instead of calling him over. He seemed to prefer it that way. Every morning he woke before sunrise, brewed plain coffee, and stepped onto his porch to watch the sky lighten over the land. The silence did not bother him. In fact, it felt safer than the noise of memories inside the house. Work filled his hours, feeding animals, repairing fences, checking water tanks, stacking hay, and writing notes in a small worn notebook about supplies. His life was steady and controlled. Not far from town, beyond a row of small homes near a dry riverbed, lived a young widow with 2 children. Her house was small, built from faded wood panels that had seen better years. Paint peeled from the doorway, and the roof made soft noises whenever the wind pushed across it at night. Months earlier, her husband had left for work at a construction site in a neighboring county. He never came home. The accident was sudden and left her with questions that no one could answer and bills she could not manage. At first, neighbors brought meals and checked on her. The town cared in quiet ways: a basket of bread on the step, a jar of preserved vegetables, an offer to watch the children for an afternoon. She thanked everyone politely, trying to appear strong for her son and daughter who were still too young to understand why their father would never walk through the door again. She tried to work. She truly did, but every job required hours she could not manage. The nearest daycare was far away and cost more than she earned in a day. Cleaning houses meant leaving the children alone. Traveling to the next town required a car she did not have. So she took small tasks whenever possible: mending clothes, washing laundry for neighbors, sweeping porches, anything she could finish while the children stayed nearby. For a while it was enough. She sold a necklace her husband once gave her, then an old radio, then a spare blanket set. Each week something else disappeared from the house. She stretched every coin carefully, buying flour instead of bread, rice instead of meat, and sometimes only tea to quiet hunger before sleep. Autumn passed into colder nights. The children began asking more often when dinner would be ready. She learned to smile before answering, even when she did not know. She stopped visiting the store as often because walking there without money felt heavier than staying home. The shopkeeper noticed but assumed she was receiving help from relatives. People often assumed things in small towns. It made life simpler. The children still played outside, though their games became quieter. Instead of toys, they used stones and sticks. Instead of running far, they stayed close to the house. Their mother watched them from the doorway, measuring how much food remained inside and calculating how many days it could last. At night, after they slept, she sat at the table staring at a small jar holding a few coins. She counted them repeatedly, hoping the number would change. It never did. Days grew harder. The cupboard slowly emptied until the shelves showed more wood than food. She boiled thin soup and told stories to distract the children from noticing the small portions. Sometimes they fell asleep early, not because they were tired, but because there was nothing else to do. Across the settlement, the rancher continued his routine without knowing her situation. His world rarely crossed into the residential side of town. Supplies were delivered to him, and he rarely attended gatherings anymore. If he saw children playing near the road, he slowed his truck and drove around them carefully, then continued without stopping. One evening, while closing his front gate, he noticed smoke rising from chimneys across the valley. Lights glowed warmly in the distance. He watched for a moment longer than usual before returning inside. On the other side of town, the widow tucked her children into bed early after sharing the last of the bread. She told them tomorrow would be better. She hoped it would be true. Wind moved through cracks in the walls, carrying desert cold into the small rooms. She wrapped blankets tighter around them and stayed awake long after they slept. Her thoughts wandered through every possibility, asking for more help, leaving town, walking to another county, but each idea fell apart under reality. Morning came too quickly. She woke to her son gently shaking her shoulder, asking if there would be breakfast. She hugged him and said yes, though she had no plan yet. Her eyes scanned the kitchen again, searching for anything she might have overlooked. There was almost nothing left. She stood at the doorway watching the distant ranch lands far beyond the town. From where she stood, she could barely see the outline of fencing stretching across open earth. She knew the rancher lived there. Everyone did. People spoke of him as a man who kept to himself and valued order. Some said he was strict. Others said he was simply tired of the world. She had never spoken to him. She turned back inside, forcing a calm voice as she told the children to wait a little longer. They nodded quietly, trusting her without question. That trust weighed heavier than any burden she had carried before. The day moved slowly, and the sun climbed high over the desert, shining on two very different lives in the same small place. One steady but lonely, the other loving but struggling. Neither knew their paths were about to cross. The rancher had lived on the land long enough to understand its normal sounds. He knew how the wind pushed against the barn doors, how cattle moved at night, and even how the chickens shifted on their wooden poles before sunrise. Nothing there surprised him anymore. So the morning he found the fence wire slightly bent, he noticed immediately. It was not broken, just loosened, as if someone had carefully moved it aside and then tried to place it back the same way. An animal would have snapped it or pushed harder. This looked careful. He stood there for a moment, running his fingers across the metal, then tightened it again. He told himself it was probably nothing. Maybe the ground shifted or an animal brushed against it lightly. But the next day he found something else. One egg was missing from the nesting box. Not cracked, not eaten, simply gone. He counted his eggs every morning out of habit. He used some, sold some, and kept track in his notebook. He checked again, certain he had written the number correctly the day before. He had. He looked around the coop. No feathers on the ground, no signs of struggle. Even the straw remained neat. That evening he locked the coop more carefully than usual. The following morning, 2 eggs were missing. Now he knew it was not chance. He walked slowly around the yard, studying the dirt. The desert ground was firm in most places, but near the watering trough the soil softened just enough to hold marks. After a few minutes he saw them footprints. They were small, not boots like a grown ranch hand would wear, not the scattered prints of a wandering animal. They were human and light. Someone had stepped carefully, placing each foot with caution. Whoever it was did not run or rush. They moved quietly, avoiding areas that would make noise. The prints led toward the back fence, then faded into harder ground. The rancher straightened and looked toward the open land beyond. The town sat far off in the distance, barely visible through heat waves rising from the sand. He felt no anger yet, only curiosity. That night he decided to stay awake longer. He turned off the house lights early and sat near the window with a small lantern unlit beside him. Hours passed, the moon rose and the desert cooled. Crickets filled the silence, then faded again. Nothing happened. Near midnight he finally slept. Morning came with no new changes, and he almost believed the visits were over. But the day after that, he discovered a feed sack slightly opened. Not torn untied. A small amount was gone, not enough to notice unless someone looked closely. The pattern was strange. Nothing valuable disappeared. No tools, no equipment, only small portions of food, eggs. A little feed, once a few potatoes from a crate beside the barn. He opened his notebook and compared dates. The removals happened every second or third night, never 2 nights in a row. Whoever it was planned carefully. People in town would have called authorities by then. But the rancher did not. Something about the carefulness held him back. A thief usually takes quickly and greedily. This person took only what they could carry quietly. He decided to see for himself. The next evening, before sunset, he finished his chores early and prepared the barn. He left one lantern hanging inside, dim enough to see shapes but not bright enough to be noticed from far away. Then he walked a long path around his land and approached the barn from behind, stepping where the ground stayed firm to avoid leaving fresh prints. He waited behind stacked hay bales where shadows stayed thick. Time passed slowly. The desert cooled again. The cattle settled. Even the wind seemed to rest. For a while he thought no one would come. Then very faintly he heard the softest sound, the careful lift of wire against wood. He did not move. A figure slipped through the fence opening and paused, listening. The person stood still long enough to show they feared being heard. Then they walked toward the barn, keeping close to darker patches of ground. The rancher noticed the steps were small and uneven, not confident strides. The figure stopped several times, turning their head toward the house before continuing. Inside the barn, the figure lit a tiny lantern covered partly by cloth to hide its glow. The dim light revealed hands, thin and shaking slightly, reaching toward the potato crate. The rancher watched quietly. The figure selected only a few, placing them carefully into a cloth bag. Then they moved to the chicken coop corner and picked up 2 eggs, only 2, wrapping them separately so they would not break. No rushing, no greed. The person even tied the feed sack closed again after taking a small amount. The rancher felt something unexpected, confusion more than anger. He stepped forward just enough for the floorboard to creak. The figure froze instantly. For a long second, neither moved. Then the person slowly turned. In the dim lantern light, he saw it was a woman, young but worn by worry. Her eyes widened and her hands trembled as she held the small bag against her chest. She did not run. Instead, she stood still, as though she knew running would only make things worse. Outside, the wind returned, brushing softly along the barn walls while they faced each other in silence. A rancher who had guarded his land for years, and a stranger who had entered it carefully night after night. The moment held heavy in the quiet desert air, waiting for words that had not yet been spoken. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The lantern between them flickered gently, sending moving shadows across the wooden walls of the barn. The woman held the cloth bag tightly against herself, as if it were the only thing keeping her steady. The rancher stood a few steps away, not blocking the door, not moving closer either. He had expected many possibilities, a careless teenager, a wandering traveler, maybe someone from town trying their luck. He had not expected a frightened mother standing still instead of running. She looked at the ground first, then slowly raised her eyes toward him. Her lips parted as if she wanted to speak, but no words came out at first. The silence felt heavier with every heartbeat. Finally, she set the bag down on a wooden crate. Her hands lifted slightly, unsure of what else to do. She did not try to hide what she had taken. The potatoes and eggs were visible in the soft light. Her voice, when it came, was quiet and shaking. She said she was sorry. The rancher listened without interrupting. His face remained calm, but his thoughts moved quickly. He noticed how little she carried. Anyone trying to steal for profit would take more, a full sack, tools, equipment, anything useful. She had taken only enough to fill a small cooking pot. She spoke again, faster this time, as if afraid she would lose courage if she stopped. She explained she never meant harm. She tied everything back, closed every gate, and came only when she believed he was asleep. She tried to sound respectful even in fear. Her voice cracked when she said the food was for her children. The words hung in the air. The rancher asked only one question: how long? She hesitated, wiping tears quickly as though embarrassed by them. Then she answered, a little more than 3 weeks. He looked toward the bag again, thinking back to the first missing egg, the loosened wire, the careful footprints. The timing matched exactly. Each visit small. Each choice measured. He realized she had never taken more even though she could have. There were tools worth money, extra supplies stacked openly, even fuel containers, yet none of it was touched. She began explaining again, almost whispering now. She said she tried to find work but could not leave her children alone. She walked to town each morning hoping someone needed help nearby. Some days she earned a little. Many days she did not. She sold belongings until nothing useful remained. She admitted she stood near the ranch fence for 2 nights before the first time she entered. She had argued with herself, then finally stepped through when she heard her children crying from hunger. She expected him to shout, or send her away immediately, or call someone from town. Instead, he asked another quiet question. Why not knock on the door? She lowered her head. She said she was afraid. People spoke of him as a man who valued order and did not welcome visitors. She feared being refused and losing even the last hope she had found. Taking small amounts felt safer than asking for help she might not receive. The rancher considered that answer carefully. For years he had kept distance from everyone. He realized people had learned not to approach him because he rarely encouraged it. He had built silence around his life so completely that even someone desperate chose the darkness over knocking. The thought stayed with him longer than he expected. The woman wiped her face and pushed the bag slightly toward him. She said he could keep it and she would not return again. She promised she would find another way somehow. Her voice tried to sound certain but carried little strength. She turned slightly toward the door but did not step forward until he spoke. "Take it!" She stopped and looked back, unsure she heard correctly. He repeated it, nodding once toward the bag. Then he added that she should come during daylight next time instead of walking at night where she could get hurt. The land had holes and uneven ground. He said it plainly, as if discussing weather. She stared at him, confused. He was not forgiving yet, not welcoming yet, simply not angry. He asked where she lived. She answered quietly, naming the small house near the dry riverbed. He knew the place. He had passed it many times but never stopped. He asked the ages of the children. She told him. He nodded slowly as though arranging thoughts into place. The woman waited, uncertain what would happen next. The fear in her shoulders eased slightly, replaced by cautious disbelief. He stepped aside from the doorway. The gesture was simple but clear. She could leave. Before going, she thanked him, the words coming out uneven but sincere. She picked up the bag carefully, holding it as though it mattered more than anything she owned. At the entrance, she paused again, turning back. She said she would not return without permission. He answered that she should return in the morning. The sentence surprised both of them. She did not ask why. She simply nodded, unsure whether hope or worry felt stronger. Then she stepped into the cool night air and disappeared beyond the fence. The rancher remained inside the barn for a while after she left. The lantern flame moved gently and the quiet returned. He looked around at the stacked supplies, the animals resting peacefully, the order he maintained every day, nothing truly lost. Yet something important had been revealed, not about his property, but about the distance he had placed between himself and others. He extinguished the lantern and walked back to the house slowly. The stars spread clearly across the open sky, and the land felt different than it had the night before, though nothing visible had changed. For the first time in many years, he did not immediately return to his routines once inside. He sat at the kitchen table thinking about a small bag of food, and a door no one had believed they could knock on. Morning would come soon, and with it a decision he had not planned to make. Morning sunlight spread slowly across the ranch, touching the fences first and then the barn roof before reaching the porch of the house. The rancher had been awake for hours already. He finished feeding the cattle earlier than usual and cleaned the yard with more care than normal, though he could not explain why. He told himself he was only keeping busy. Still, every few minutes his eyes drifted toward the road leading from town. He did not expect her to come. People often avoided returning to places where they had been caught doing something wrong. He assumed she might choose another path or simply stay away out of fear. Yet he had left the gate unlatched, something he had not done in years. The morning passed quietly. The wind moved gently through dry grass. Chickens scratched near the coop, and a lone cloud crossed the pale sky. Just as he began to think she would not appear, he noticed two small figures walking beside a taller one far down the road. They walked slowly, stopping often. The children lagged behind, distracted by stones and patches of dirt, while the woman encouraged them forward. When they reached the gate, she hesitated. Her hand rested on the wood for several seconds before she pushed it open. The rancher stood near the porch, waiting. She approached carefully, holding her children's hands. The boy hid partly behind her side, while the younger one watched everything with wide curiosity. The woman greeted him politely, her voice softer than the breeze. She thanked him again for the night before and explained she came because he had asked her to. He nodded and looked toward the barn. There was no long speech, no complicated discussion. He simply handed her a bucket and pointed to the chicken coop. He showed her how he collected eggs each morning, how the feed should be measured, and how the gate latch must be secured afterward. She listened closely, repeating each step to be certain she understood. The children stayed near the fence at first, unsure whether they were allowed to move. After a while, the rancher told them they could sit on the porch steps where the shade was cooler. They obeyed quietly, watching their mother work. She moved carefully, trying not to make mistakes. He noticed she treated the tasks with seriousness, as if the small job mattered greatly. When she finished, she waited for his approval rather than assuming it. He then showed her the vegetable patch beside the house. Some plants struggled from lack of regular tending. He explained how to water them properly and remove dry leaves. She worked slowly but steadily while he repaired a loose board nearby. Hours passed without tension. Around midday, he brought out a jug of water and set it on the porch. The children drank gratefully, then sat swinging their feet from the step. The younger one asked simple questions about the animals. The rancher answered briefly at first, but gradually his responses grew longer as the child's curiosity continued. The sound of small laughter drifted across the yard, something the ranch had not heard in many seasons. By afternoon, the tasks were complete. The woman wiped her hands and approached him, uncertain whether she should leave or wait for instructions. He handed her a small paper sack filled with eggs and a few vegetables from the garden. She immediately shook her head, saying she had not come for charity. He replied calmly that it was payment for the work she had done. She accepted after a pause, holding the bag carefully. Relief showed on her face, though she tried to hide it. Before leaving, she asked if she should return the next day. He answered yes the same time in the morning. From then on, a quiet routine formed. Each day she arrived after sunrise with the children. She cleaned the coop, watered plants, and swept the porch. Sometimes she washed windows or organized tools exactly as he showed her. He discovered she paid attention to details, placing everything back where it belonged. The children grew more comfortable. They named the chickens and followed them around the yard. The rancher pretended not to notice when they spoke to the animals, though once he corrected them gently about how to hold an egg without dropping it. Days turned into weeks. The ranch changed without effort. The house felt less empty when voices filled the air. Even meals became different. He began cooking slightly more than needed, leaving portions wrapped on the table where she could take them home. She never took extra beyond what he offered. In town, people began noticing she no longer looked worried. The children appeared healthier and walked with energy again. Some neighbors wondered how she managed it, but she only answered that she found work outside town. The rancher also noticed changes in himself. He no longer rushed chores simply to finish them. He sometimes explained how weather affected cattle or why certain repairs mattered. The boy listened carefully, trying to imitate the way he tied knots. The younger child sat on the porch drawing shapes in the dust. One evening, after completing the day's tasks, the children ran ahead toward the gate while the woman lingered a moment. She said she hoped to find steady employment soon so she would not depend on him forever. He answered that learning new skills was part of work too, and she was doing well. It was the longest sentence he had spoken in years. As they left, the sun dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows across the land. The rancher stood watching until they disappeared down the road. The place felt quiet again, but no longer lonely. The following morning, he found himself checking the road earlier than usual, waiting for the sound of small footsteps returning across the dust. The routine continued through changing weather. Warm days slowly gave way to cooler mornings, and the light arrived later across the wide land. By then, the rancher no longer waited inside the house when morning came. He usually stood near the gate, pretending to check the fence while watching the road from town. Most days, the children appeared first, their small shapes moving quickly ahead while their mother followed at a calmer pace. The boy often carried a small stick he used like a walking staff, copying what he had seen the rancher do. The younger child waved the moment she spotted him, no longer shy. The ranch felt alive in a way it had not for many years. The woman's confidence grew with every task she learned. She could now feed the chickens without spilling grain, water the plants in proper amounts, and organize supplies neatly inside the barn. Sometimes she even reminded the rancher when something needed repair before he noticed it himself. He trusted her enough to leave certain chores entirely in her care. That trust mattered more to her than the food she earned each day. It meant stability, something she had not felt since before her husband's passing. One afternoon she arrived holding a folded paper. Her hands trembled slightly as she explained she had applied for steady work in town at a small cafe. The owner needed help during daytime hours, and the schedule allowed her children to attend school nearby. She was unsure she would be chosen, but she wanted him to know she might not always come every morning. He nodded and said that was good. A few days later, she returned with brighter eyes. She had been accepted. Training would begin the following week. The job would pay enough for rent, food, and school supplies. For the first time in many months, her voice carried relief instead of worry. She thanked him more than once, though he brushed it off each time with a short reply. To him, the change felt natural, as if things had simply moved into the correct place. Her visits became less frequent after that. She still came early on days she was free, helping with larger tasks like cleaning storage shelves or gathering vegetables before market day. The children now wore school clothes and spoke about lessons they learned. Sometimes they read aloud from small books while sitting on the porch. The rancher listened quietly, pretending to focus on repairing tools, but he followed every word. Weeks passed, and the day came when she told him they had found a small house closer to town. It was modest but strong, and she could manage the payments with her wages. She said she would no longer need to take food from the ranch regularly. He felt a pause settle in the air after she spoke. The land around them remained the same, fences stretching into the distance, cattle moving slowly, yet he sensed something ending and beginning at once. He told her that was how things should be. On her last regular morning of work, she cleaned the coop carefully, watered every plant, and swept the porch longer than usual. The children helped, treating each chore seriously. When they finished, she handed him a small envelope. Inside was a portion of her first saved wages. She insisted it was repayment. He returned it to her hand. He explained she owed nothing because she had worked for everything she received. After a moment, she accepted his decision, though her eyes grew wet. The children hugged him quickly, unsure of adult rules but certain of their feelings. They left that afternoon carrying the last basket of vegetables he packed for them. Days afterward, the ranch felt quiet again, yet different from before they arrived. The silence no longer felt heavy. It felt peaceful. He still followed his routines, but sometimes he paused, expecting the sound of running feet that did not come. Then one Sunday morning, he heard a knock at the door. When he opened it, the woman and her children stood there holding a homemade meal in a covered dish. They had come to visit, not to work or ask for anything. The children spoke eagerly about school and new friends. The woman shared stories from the cafe. They sat together on the porch longer than planned. The visit repeated the next week, then the week after that. It became a habit. Every Sunday they came by choice. Sometimes they helped in the garden for fun, sometimes they simply talked. The rancher began preparing extra chairs on Saturday evenings without admitting why. Neighbors eventually learned pieces of the story. Some were surprised he had never reported the missing food. Others understood once they saw the laughter around his porch and the children treating the place like a second home. Seasons changed again, bringing new plants to the garden and new growth to the town. The woman's life stabilized. The children grew stronger and happier. And the rancher, who once kept distance from everyone, now kept a place at his table ready each week. Nothing about the land had truly changed. The same fences, the same animals, the same wide sky. But the house no longer felt empty. The night he first found footprints in the dust, he believed someone had taken from him. In time, he realized something else had happened. By choosing understanding instead of anger, he had gained the one thing he thought was lost forever, people who returned not because they needed help, but because they wanted to be there.